Around the turn of the 20th century, Catholic schools were some of the primary Christian education institutions in the United States. And then you saw, with growing sort of concerns with theological liberalism, you see a lot of evangelical Christian schools popping up.
Hey, welcome into Making the Leap. Glad to have you along. We're doing a little something different today because we have a neighbor. We work every week with a neighbor, and I do another show. And another show. I do several dozen shows.
I feel like your brain is compartmentalized all over the place. That's hard.
One of our neighbors, one of our most important neighbors, and really kind of the anchor tenant of the Herzog Foundation is, in terms of media, well before we got here, was The Lion. And Josh Mann is the managing editor of The Lion, and because there is so much fast and frenzied news happening, we thought this would be a great day to, number one, introduce this audience. And I'm kind of ashamed to say we've not really done that.
Well, we reference The Lion almost every single time we do an episode, but I think to go beyond that, we haven't done that.
Yeah, like an inside look at what we do at The Lion. Now, I anchor a show called The Lion Week in Review. Josh, as the managing editor, along with his colleagues who write and contribute to The Lion, join us every week, and I hope people will check that out. But anyway, Josh, first of all, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's a
It only
pleasure
took,
to be here.
3 years?
Yeah.
It only took a few years.
Yeah, it's kind of silly that we haven't had you by now. But the thing is, you and I and this show, we have always kind of treated this as sort of church and state, but now we're seeing it blend more than ever before in the Trump administration, and that's kind of why we thought we'd bring you in, because education seemed like it was the secular versus those of us that choose homeschool or Christian school. Now we're seeing in rapid fire these worlds colliding. Is that kind of what you're seeing in your newsroom?
Yeah. I mean, I think we started to see during the pandemic parents realizing what was happening in their kids' public school. You've talked with lots of parents and people in the education space who report the same, and they realized, maybe there's some better options out there. And a lot of public schools shuttered and sent the kids home, and so parents became homeschool parents all of a sudden and started to, I think, be more open to other options. At the same time, we saw state legislatures passing school choice measures. We've seen polling show that parents increasingly are open and interested in multiple options. And so I think the public-private school divide is lessening. I think there are more and better options than there have ever been before. And in a lot of states, these parents now have some funding options, a little bit of help, maybe to use some of their tax dollars for these other options. So I do think we're seeing this kind of, I don't know, it seems very American, more choices, like a supermarket.
I want to hit rewind and start with The Lion and where it came to be. You were one of the first here. We came along fairly early, but you were here on the ground floor before this was a building, before we had a studio, before The Lion was the size it is today, which has grown exponentially. Stan Herzog, who made the Herzog Foundation possible and our media entities like The Lion and these shows, that was before COVID. Stan was always interested in Christian school. And to your point, Christian school, homeschooling exploded during COVID, but COVID was a catalyst.
Right.
But I don't think Stan Herzog started the Herzog Foundation with COVID in mind, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, the beauty and the benefits of Christian education have been known for a long time, and it has steadily grown over the years. I think early, maybe around the turn of the 20th century, Catholic schools were some of the primary Christian education institutions in the United States. And then you saw, with growing sort of concerns with theological liberalism, you see a lot of evangelical Christian schools popping up in, say, the middle of the 1900s. And then it's grown from there. We start to see school choice in Wisconsin in the early 1990s. That was sort of some of the early school choices we know it, and that has slowly grown. We see Florida, for a number of years, even before COVID, was dipping its toe in school choice. And so I think you're right. We've seen it's kind of been growing, but maybe not, just a little bit more under the surface, and then COVID kind of took the lid off of everything.
And so talk about the idea of The Lion, because maybe not everybody understands
like its purpose or what?
Yeah, well,
it's
when
for?
the foundation, people will ask me all the time. They say, "So, what do you guys do at the Herzog Foundation?" I say, "Well, we offer trainings, but we're also a media entity, and you
Yeah.
guys have started a really robust website. Where did that come from, and how did you get started with it?"
Yeah, so I think the desire for the Lion is really to inform families, American families, education stakeholders, parents, grandparents, folks who are, real Americans. I don't want to say real Americans, but just proud Americans who are concerned about the direction of our future and who, may make educational decisions. How do we inform them about what's going on? What's going on in government and education and the world that affects you, that affects the family, that affects other issues that we care about, like faith and culture. And so that's the idea, is we want to tell the news. We want to inform those families of what's happening. We want to tell the great things that are happening in Christian schools. We want them to know what their options are. And so really the Lion is one of our broadest initiatives, and it's really a long-term plan to help slowly but surely educate as many people in America as we can on the issues.
It's grown huge, by the way. Let's brag on it for a minute.
Well, I
'Cause
appreciate that.
It started with you,
Yes.
right? More or less.
Yeah, I helped start it. We planned it, me and Chris Voss here at the foundation. We planned and launched it in August of 21, and so today we're publishing about 75 articles a week, and there's still more to cover, if you can believe that.
Which, by the way, that's a lot.
I was just going to say 75 articles a week is cray-cray. Like, it's a lot.
With a relatively small staff comparatively
Yes.
to a lot of larger publications.
That's right. Yeah, we pride ourselves on efficiency, on hard work, and we've got a great bank of freelance writers who do a lot of writing for us. And so, this idea of the Lion is the Lion sort of symbolizes courage, and part of what the Lion tries to embody is this kind of ideal that we should be courageous in our coverage of what's happening, and as Christians also be courageous in letting our perspective be known. We don't hide our perspective. We're a right of center publication who writes from a Christian perspective, and so we kind of planned it, and early on we were publishing more op-eds, more special pieces from Christian educators. We still do some of that, and within the first few months we started covering more news, breaking news, education news, and it's only grown from there.
I always tell people to bookmark it. If you want a trustworthy news site, I think that's one of those, you can get it on your phone and check it out anytime you want. I think people should.
It's important because, when I look at sources for information, I think Christianity Today is one that comes to mind. That doesn't feel a Christian, it doesn't have a Christian perspective 100% anymore.
It's definitely lost
it's more
its way.
progressive, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's an important resource, because there's oftentimes I feel like parents kind of sit like, where do I go? Maybe where do I go to try to understand what is this DEI initiative that we're talking about? What is this SEL that we're talking about? And I feel like there are a lot of places out there that are no longer reporting from a fair and balanced place.
Yeah, you hear it all the time. Where do I go to get trustworthy news?
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. That's what you do.
Yeah, and I think, for a lot of average parents who, they might watch the news. I mean, people don't really tune in to the 6 o'clock news like they used to, but they see the news. They'll read about it on their phone, and maybe they'll see a friend post it on Facebook, but I think average people they're not really sure why does this matter? Okay, somebody introduced a bill. Why should I care? Or what's Trump on about this DEI business? Is this really a big deal? And what the Lion is trying to do is stay conversational. We dig deep, but we keep the articles at a pretty understandable level for average people to get, why does this matter? How does this affect my family? And so that would be one reason I would say check out the Lion. You might find a similar story on another news outlet, but it probably isn't going to help you understand why it matters to your family.
Let's talk about you for a minute, if you don't mind. You're a pretty modest guy, but people should know about Josh. You're one of the more interesting guys to work with here because you come from a background that is pretty diverse, not just journalism. You've been an academe. You have lived abroad. You've raised a family for a time abroad. You and your wife have experience with both Christian school and homeschool. So you kind of come to the table when we talk about these themes with a lot of perspective.
Well, I appreciate that, and I don't think I'm a DEI hire either.
No,
so it just
no.
imagine.
And guilty of being a white, straight Christian guy.
I know. It doesn't make any sense, but I'm a pretty simple, rural Northwest Missourian, and so it's. There was a time in my young adult life where I hadn't been west of the Rocky Mountains, and in the end, I managed to live overseas for 5 years and be in academia and travel quite a bit. In that job. And so, part of it is I think a lot of people can look back on their life and see ways that God has led them and not fully understand how it all happened. Mm-hmm. But some of it was I felt called in high school into Christian ministry, and so I sought the education that would enable that and sort of fell in love with studying and digging deep into the scriptures. And so that led me into a master's program and eventually a PhD overseas, which led to a job thinking about digital technology and how that's affecting the church and Christians and Bible reading, which led to also a startup where I worked to help people learn. It's kind of the Rosetta Stone of biblical languages. And so I had all of these weird experiences that really came together and have in common a few different things, seeking truth, research, helping regular people understand what is significant about what's happening around them, and then into journalism, which is sort of that same kind of thing. You're really trying to report on what you see and hear and help people understand, why is this significant? What does this mean for me? And so it all makes sense once you look back, but boy, if you're 24 or whatever and you're looking ahead, you think that doesn't look like it makes any sense.
Your perspective in raising children abroad, and we were talking about this before the show started. I didn't know this part. Your wife started as a Christian school teacher. You're homeschool parents now, but you have some experience. Oh, this is really interesting with Christian school in Europe, and you said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, there's a more ready embrace of Christian school in what is a decidedly more secular Europe than even here in the United States.
Yeah, that's right. And this is especially true in the United Kingdom, where, you have a state church. You have, this data should be updated maybe, but a few years ago, the church there, the Church of England, still polled pretty popularly, even though hardly anybody goes. And most people want to see the clerical collar at their wedding and their funeral in Britain. There's still this cultural sort of remnant of Christianity, but for better or worse. And with a state sort of religion, so to speak, with the state church, there's just, even though they're secular in culturally, there's kind of this acceptance that the church and the state get along. There's not this strict ideal of separation of church and state, which, by the way, is misunderstood.
That's
here.
right.
Right.
So in the UK, the Church of England, that's the church now the king is the head of. Is that what they believe, right?
That's right. And there's some technicalities there. I don't fully understand all of its ins and outs, but that's right. And
even though the royal family is not government per se, they're still considered an institution that much of the public defers to.
That's true. Yeah, and some of it's pomp and circumstance, it seems like, but there's still this kind of cultural acceptance that, well, Christianity is part of our heritage. And so one of the results is in education. You've got Church of England schools. My son's first year, he actually attended it was a village school, so a public school in this village called Brandon. It's outside of Durham, England. And it was part of a Catholic parish church. And so it was called St. Patrick's. It was a Catholic elementary school that a lot of the local village kids went to. You're not
But considered
all
public.
of them
Considered a public
considered
school.
public in terms of the way it was funded. And so they did have a little bit more of, they had some times where there was a little chapel. And nobody was making a big deal out of it.
How
And
funny.
yeah.
And
yeah.
that's recent too. I mean, we're not
That's
talking
right,
about like
no.
how if it were us, 20 plus years ago, that's
That would be,
recent.
that would be 8 years ago or so. And it really hasn't changed much since.
So how do you, having studied there, how do you explain here? Is it back to that militant, warped idea of separation of church and state, which you're correct, it was never about
Yeah.
being free of religion.
Right.
That's not what it was supposed to be, right? But is that it? That kind of militant? I was just talking to Kirk Cameron, actually, in another interview that I'd just recently done. And it's. I remember growing up, and even as we started raising kids, there was just this instinctive feeling that we'd been taught, well, church is a Sunday
Right.
thing. Let's not bother ourselves with it in school Monday through Friday. Even though we were Christians and
Right.
believers, I thought that for a long time as a younger man.
Yeah, and I think it's. I think part of it is that this kind of militant atheism kind
Yes.
of. It was a vocal minority that I think scared people off a little bit.
Evangelical style
Yeah.
type.
Yeah, and I think also it is a misunderstanding of the separation of church and state. You can read on the line. Actually, we've a few times covered kind of what does it mean in that letter, that old letter when we use this word separation of church and state. And I think America was never intended, as far as I can tell, to to be shy about its religious faith, but
or devoid of it.
or devoid of it. And that's what I think secularism has gotten wrong, but has influenced us to believe. I wish we could debate well again. Make America debate well again. I don't. That's not very catchy, but can we have convictions and talk about them and disagree? And okay, I'm not worried. So my kid has a Christian teacher in the classroom, and it's okay to admit it. Like this is
Right.
America.
Yeah.
And
A
we
Christian teacher in a public school is okay.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Yeah.
okay, so the teacher has a cross on their desk. Like we just wrote
Right.
about this teacher with a crucifix near her desk, and she was chastised, and eventually she's lost her job, and there's a lawsuit over it. Since when is that American? I don't understand how we've let ourselves get to that point, but I mean, here we are.
It's a zealotry to get, again, to make the culture devoid of truth. God's truth, gospel truth, the scriptures. If you can erase that, if you can scrub it, then you can start talking about there's no such thing as gender. I mean, it's sky's the limit is really what it's all rooted in, it seems to me. When in fact, as you point out, it bears repeating if people don't know it. The whole concept of this separation of church and state thing is not a founding document thing, but rather Thomas Jefferson promising a woman, we're not going to allow a government to tell you how to operate here in your church, effectively. That's what the promise was.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we don't want the government telling people how or whether to be religious,
Yeah.
but it certainly doesn't mean that religion shouldn't be in the public square or even in government-funded entities. And the Supreme Court has ruled in a few key cases, and they're going to have another one here in April to consider with this Catholic charter school in Oklahoma. Just how should that look in America?
Which is interesting too, because I feel, as I read, Trump's executive orders coming out with regards to education, and one of the things that he has said is he wants to, I believe, I'm summarizing, but his words were not exact here, prioritizing patriotic style education or patriotic schools that were focusing on maybe what those documents actually entail and maybe what they don't. And I think that is where people start to freak out and they start to think, what is now we're talking about nationalism and all that, where I think there's probably a I don't want to call it a gray area, but things that need to happen in education, like let's really understand what those documents say and not what we're being told.
Well,
by
also, isn't it
the
funny?
news.
That's a great point you make. People are afraid that Trump is going to make our public schools too prideful in our nation, too flag-waving, too nationalistic. And I would simply say to people that are worried about that, welcome to our argument of school choice.
Yeah, and That was the argument that they made when they started the public school system in the 1800s, was actually this common school system. By the way, Horace Mann, who was kind of sort of the key person behind this, I don't know if I'm related to him. Maybe I am.
M-A-N-N, same spelling.
It's
It is
same
the same
spelling,
spelling.
yeah.
So Horace Mann, just again, point of interest, Christine attended the
Yes.
Horace Mann School of Education there at Northwest
Right.
Missouri
It was
State.
one
Yeah,
of their.
yeah.
It was their little lab school.
Yeah.
So it's
Uh-huh.
a state school, a lab school named after Horace Mann. Go ahead and tell the
So,
story. Yeah.
you know, and my understanding is that he actually homeschooled his kids, which is interesting. But in any case, part of what the promise of public education was to get these kids on the same page with some national pride. And I think most Americans understand there's a level of patriotism which is healthy. And I think most Americans probably start to get uncomfortable at some point. Now, we can disagree about where that is, but I think as far as the executive order and what I read, I think it's pro-civics. It wants, and we need kids. Our colleague Michael Ryan here has written a book, and he longs, and I think we all do, to have kids who understand, how does a bill become a law? What is my role? His book is called You Rule, and the whole idea is that this is self-government, that you as a citizen really are in charge, and we need people who understand that in our schools, and so I don't see any issue with it. I understand the left, you know, are going to assume some things about it, but I think civics education is definitely needed.
It doesn't mean we're going to be like raising our right arms or our left arms and honoring something that isn't
And
true.
you know, along those lines, so I've got, because I was in academia, I have tons of liberal friends on Facebook especially, and in academia, and good people who I knew in that line of work who are scared to death. I mean, honestly, they're saying things that they're not true. It's where they're getting their news and things like that. But I'll say, okay, if you want to, let's watch out for oligarchy. I'm all for it. Like, let's watch out for anything that the current administration does that smells like communism. Like, welcome leftist friends to becoming a government watchdog. Like, I'll do it with you. But let's just be careful that we're actually reading the executive orders and not just getting spoon-fed, you know, from a legacy media that I think has lost its credibility after, you know, pretty much everyone on all sides admits it covered up our previous president's cognitive decline, just to name one pretty extreme scandal.
Well, it cut yes.
And a pretty badly run oligarchy that is zeroing in on decentralizing. I mean, this is an oligarchy that wants to disintegrate the Department of Education.
Yeah.
You know, he ran on being committed to deconstructing and tearing down an entire branch of government, effectively. Not branch, but I should say, you know, department of government. That's not very oligarchic. That's not very king-like to me.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's decentralizing.
Yeah, let's shrink government. I mean, I think when in your lifetime have you seen such a push to shrink government? And I hope they're successful.
Which I think is actually what people don't understand. They don't view it as a shrinking of anything. I really they see it as, where's our money going to go? We've been used to the bloat that has existed in all these different departments, and now that is what they're afraid of more than anything, if I had to characterize it.
And when we hear it now, again, our eyes are wide open in a time that we wouldn't have, maybe even 7-8 years ago, we wouldn't have thought the same way. But it's like you hear this almost panic in some people's voices. Oh, no, what if there's no school? It's like, well, first of all, that's not true. But even if that were true, why would parents be horrified that they would have to take the education of their children in their own hands anyway? I mean, we're in a weird place in the country where we're terrified that the government is not going to be able to teach our children, it seems to me.
I think they're also afraid their government's not going to be there to take care of them in ways that they've been used to. And that, which is kind of that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem. When
And
you
the head
rely
of
there.
the AFT, this was maybe a month or two ago.
The American Federation.
Yeah,
Federation of
that's right.
Teachers,
Weingarten said that she didn't care, really. She said, you know, the Department of Education, she wasn't that, one of the early AFT people was opposed to its establishment. And so she didn't even seem to be all that worried about it. But I think, to your point, what the federal government does in education may shrink, but it doesn't. The abolishment of this department doesn't mean the federal government won't do anything in education. And so I think we still are going to have to watch and see and argue and debate about what should the federal government's role be in education. But the other thing is, a lot of people in the educational establishment who worry about these things also want local control of schools. And so
Yes.
I kind of feel like this seems like a win-win, but it's Trump, and I understand people don't like Trump, and he's Trumpy.
Yeah.
Trump is Trump.
Yeah.
You know, he hasn't
Yeah.
changed. But when you just look on the face of what's happening, I think more people should be welcoming, this hard look at how are we spending taxpayer dollars? Are we getting out what we're putting in, especially in K-12 education?
Well, and when we look at test results or we look at scores that are coming through where there's an obvious decline, we're not getting out. We're not getting anything. We're not getting as much out of what we have been putting in. And I think to your earlier point, I remember well being in education, this is 20 plus years ago. The majority of the teachers I was around on a daily basis loathed that Department of Education and all the different I'll call them mandates that would come down to us and all the different things we had to do. So I feel like if you're right, if we take Trump's name out of it and just say, here's really what it's about, it would resonate differently. It's just because we've assigned this one person's name to it, because there aren't many teachers I know that want to be told to a minute detail what to do in their classroom. They don't want that at all.
That's a great point. I remember when you were teaching, I remember George W. Bush and the No Child Left Behind thing.
Which was massively flawed, of course.
I remember all your liberal teacher
Yes.
friends screaming and yelling that
Yes.
George W. Bush was a monster for
Right.
setting No Child Left
and
Behind
it
standards.
it wasn't a great idea, and it had a lot of flaws to it.
But to Josh's
But-
point, right, that's why you would
Yes.
be cheering,
Yes, you
tearing
should
down
be
the Department of
cheering, right.
Education.
Yeah.
Yes.
State by state, let's run it that way.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Let's
what
not make it
conservative
national,
doesn't-
right.
Yeah, let's keep government out,
Yeah.
and
Let's not make one set of standards to apply to everybody.
You mentioned the
Yeah.
Oklahoma story. We could keep you all day, but I'll let you go on this question, and that is, what's going on before the Supreme Court that people should understand? I know you guys are carrying and covering it at readlion.com.
Yeah, so the state of Oklahoma has a virtual charter school board that approves virtual charter schools. So a charter school is a public school that has a private board. They're highly successful in a lot of different places, especially kind of in urban areas where they become an alternative to a failing public school district. Well, if you want to start one in Oklahoma, you go before this board, and for the first time ever, there was an application from a Catholic charter school, and the board approved it. Lawsuits shortly followed, and now there are two cases that have the Oklahoma State Supreme Court rejected it. They said this is not constitutional. It's going to the Supreme Court. They've agreed to hear it. So the Supreme Court of the United States will in April have oral arguments and probably decide in July whether or not this Catholic charter school is constitutional. So it's a huge deal for this question of separation of church and state, the opportunity perhaps for charter schools or for taxpayer dollars to end up in schools that have a religious affiliation. And so there's a lot of big questions around it. This Supreme Court has shown itself eager, I think, to uphold religious freedom, which might suggest that they'll uphold the constitutionality.
What was the story? I'm sorry to stretch here, but it feels like it was a related story, and I think it was a Missouri-based story about playground material being given to religious schools versus traditional public schools. And didn't the court weigh in on that?
That's right.
Am I remembering that story
That's
correctly?
right. So it's one of the 3 Supreme Court cases in the last 5 or 10 years that have school choice implications. And so this was a Lutheran school, and there was essentially they sided with the school that you can't tell the school, well, you can't have the equipment or the government funding, whatever it was, just because you're Lutheran.
So why isn't that the same? Because I thought the Supreme Court had effectively already ruled you can't be excluded because you're a Lutheran school from state funds for your playground or whatever. I wonder why this is different in Oklahoma.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so that's what the other side is arguing. So in favor of the school. They'll be arguing along the lines of that case and others recently in the Supreme Court to say, look, there's precedent for upholding the religious freedom of this school and you can't discriminate against it because it's Catholic. That's kind of how they're arguing.
It's not endorsing it. It's not excluding it. That's the point.
Exactly.
Right.
It's actually it's its own censorship if you exclude the religious school from what the other schools can enjoy.
I was actually going to pivot really fast. I know we're running short on time. With the Read Line, with the printed articles, there's also a video news show component within what the Line does here.
Nice little plug.
Well, I think it's important, right? Because there are people that are like, what's happening here? And to get these the bits, I'll call them little tidbits, the little quick overviews of what's happening every week is something that you guys have been working on that I think a lot of people maybe don't know that listen to this podcast or watch this information, but there's the news piece that isn't necessarily just school focused.
I think it's award-winning now, Josh. I think we can call it award-winning.
Yeah, it is, and the Lion is an award-winning publication, so we're proud of our writers and for the quality of work that everybody puts in, and our media folks, and Chris is the host to the Lion Week in Review, which we record every single week. And I would commend it to people. It's a half hour tops.
Little roundtable discussion.
That's right.
About the headlines of the day.
So would you say kind of an alternate to The View, maybe?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's our view.
A little bit of a spin.
It's
right.
better. It's better. It's a little better.
And here's what's really cool. We have just partnered with a radio station in Kansas City, KCMO, as well as a radio station in St. Louis, News Talk STL. And on the weekends, they carry the Lion Week in Review.
So you're
We're
growing,
expanding.
you're expanding.
That's right.
But that's what I mean. I think that's what's neat about what the foundation does, because it's just here's what you can read, here's what you can watch, here's what you can learn, and it expands in a way that I think is important for people who don't want to plug through just the one mainstream set of information that's coming through.
Or don't like sitting and reading. I'm not a big reader.
You're not a reader. I'm a huge reader.
I like to listen and watch more than I like to read, frankly.
Yes.
So,
We got something for everybody.
I think that, right?
And you're on your way to Washington because this is really exciting. The Lion, again, continuing to expand and grow. We're bringing on a D.C. correspondent now.
That's right. So we're opening a D.C. bureau. We're going to be covering more Beltway news. And so much of what happens in D.C. affects American families. It affects schools and education. And so we want to start to have journalists on the ground there who can be at hearings, who can be at press briefings, who can talk with insiders there to get the latest, what's happening and how is it going to affect you.
I think that's so important. I think it's so important for parents to know.
Well, I can tell you that these are people who are mission-driven.
Yes.
They love what they do. They work hard every day, and it's been a pleasure to get to work alongside them. I'm sorry it's taken us this long to talk about what you do, but I do hope people will go to readlion.com every day. Like every day you've got updated stuff there all the time. And really talented writers. Michael Ryan, who's a former newspaper guy from way back, among them. So check it out, readline.com. Josh Mann, the managing editor. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's going to do it for this week's edition of Making the Leap. Be sure to check it out every single week. We hope you will. Leave us a 5-star review and a written review. Don't forget the Lion Week in Review, another show offering, and readline.com. We'll see you back here next week.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.